Bring in Michael Crowley, senior foreign affairs correspondent at Politico. It's been, at least, what, 16 hours since you and I last spoke on television. Michael, I always call the American people, vis-a-vis politicians, we are both the customers and we're the boss. So having said that, when do you reckon we might learn about what the director of the FBI knows and how big this may call for a judgment on your part? Where does this go? How big does this get?
Well, that's the big question, Brian, and I think that that's the frustration not only of people who are following the story from the outside, but evidently even some members of Congress now. Are we seeing the tip of a giant iceberg? How deep does the ice go? It's not clear. I think that, every day this story stays in the headlines and we have events like the Attorney General having to recuse himself from the investigation. I think the pressure grows on Comey to share more information. But we don't know how big this gets. We don't know the substance of these contacts, which is a really critical question. That could run the gamut from, on one extreme, unproven, some sort of collusion in which the Trump campaign was working with Russians to try to undermine Hillary Clinton. Again, one extreme, I'm just saying that's a speculative possibility. All the way on the other extreme end, Brian, maybe these were harmless conversations that had to do with business deals that had nothing to do with the campaign. Maybe people have relationships with Russians who have ties to the Kremlin. They may not even be aware that these are people with intelligence ties. Now, that sounds a little hard to believe, but that is a really wide spectrum, Brian, and we just don't know. So I think the pressure really is growing on Comey.
Michael, in his own way, the Attorney General was trying to describe this Russian ambassador as being an old-style, kind of Soviet-style Russian. Tell our viewers what you know. Paint a picture of this Russian ambassador we're talking about.
Yeah, Brian, I'm actually going to have a story about the ambassador going up soon, which I hope people will read. But I can tell you that he is a career diplomat, trained as an engineer, spent time in New York City at the United Nations, served in Washington in the 1980s, went back to Moscow. He's done a lot of arms control and scientific cooperation work in the 1990s. He has a pretty good reputation for being a smart guy, but he does, he did come of age in the 1980s when the Cold War was winding down, but still underway. He is tough. He will debate people until the sun goes down and then comes back up again. I think you saw very interestingly Sessions characterize their conversation as having grown testy because the ambassador was talking about Ukraine in a context where he was blaming everything on the Ukrainians, and Sessions seemed to find that implausible and lost his patience with him. But Kislyak also keeps a low profile. He's not a guy who has ever wanted to schmooze reporters. He's not quoted very often. I'm sure the spotlight is very awkward and uncomfortable for him right now. He's a guy who has liked to operate under the radar.
But if I'm allowed to say so, boy, does he look the part. You could see him in line for a ride at Disney World and say, hey, I bet that guy is a Russian ambassador, doesn't he?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he does bring back the memories of the Cold War. He is a big guy, very soft-spoken for his size, fluent English speaker, by the way. But, listen, I would just say, Brian, that although he's tough, and that story that Sessions told captures the idea that he really promotes the Kremlin party line, if you go back and look at his public remarks, he does often say, I hope that we can have better relations with the United States. I think we can. We've seen better times, and I hope they can come back again. So this is a guy who is looking for a reset, so to speak, between Washington and Moscow.
Michael Crowley, and again, we'll add to Michael's desire that everybody check out the piece he writes being posted tonight on the Russian ambassador. Michael, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.